Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Coach's Corner, part two of the West Kingdom Heroes and Traditions. And Jarl Ailgheanan is going to be your host tonight, so I'm going to pass it over to him.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SCA Coach's Corner, Heroes and Traditions. And tonight's stream continues our conversation about the First Kingdom, the West. The early days were so rich in history and exciting characters that we didn't get very far in episode one. So I'm going to be setting a timer to hopefully help us get through the decades tonight. My co-host on this adventure is Jarl Thorfin the Cruel, but fate has played a cruel trick on him. He recently started a new job as the boss, but tonight he has a few employees sick. So, like a great boss, he's going to cover for them and he won't be here. The first guest that I'd like to introduce is Viscount Leotulf of the Silver Hills. His Excellency has been an active member of the West Kingdom fighter community since 1988 and won his Viscounties in the Principality of the Mist in 2005 and 2010. Welcome, Sir Leotulf.
Thank you, Grace. I'm looking forward to this. This will be a lot of fun.
And we're pleased to introduce to our stream Landgraf Sagan of the Eastern Sea, who started in 1977. That's set in the Wayback Machine a year or two. In the East, and then moved to the West in 1980, and has since then, he's recently been residing in Artemisia, and we are pleased to be able to welcome him to our discussion about all these wonderful people of the West, of whom he was one. So welcome.
Most kind, most kind.
And we hope joining us at some point will be our returning guest, Duke James Greyhelm. We certainly hope so. But until then, let's get started and try to jump back into the 80s. We just really dipped our toes in, we really didn't get very far. So, Viscount Sagan, why don't you tell us your sort of first thoughts about, the fighters in the 80s in the Kingdom of the West?
Well, so when I came out to the West, I came at an interesting time. Paul was obviously still active. Radnor was active. And so it was one of those times where I got to see the best of the quote unquote old and the new coming together, because their styles were just dramatically different. But as knights, and it was just one of those times where being a squire was a special thing to me anyway. Meeting these individuals who I'd heard of Paul, hadn't met him or anything, had not heard of Radnor until I got there, and it was I just happened to luck out, and I was living in the Bay Area, and so I immediately became immersed with both of them. So it was, who else? Well, His Grace James, I sure hope he joins. He was around, he was in the Bay Area, so he was about, I'd say 30 miles away, I believe up in Berkeley. And so it was just an amazing time. And the thing that got me was going to a fighter practice meant fighters, not just a couple of people like I'd been accustomed to back east, but a large number of fighters. So it was.
Excuse me, Sagan. I know that Bart was up and running. Was mission practice up and running at that time?
Mission started. I was trying to remember that. Trying to put some notes together. I cannot. So we were going to Bart, and then mission started. So I would say there was probably, before I started going and teaching at the mission practice, it was probably 3 or 4 years, I think, but don't quote me on that. So,
hey, Leotulf, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about those two practices, especially the Bart practice? I was very fortunate a few years back to be able to go to the Bart practice, and I know it's one of the, if not the longest running practice, it's definitely one of them, but I think it might actually be the longest running.
I believe it is, and it's, as you might expect, it's not quite in downtown Berkeley, but just outside of it. So it's right near the birthplace of the SCA. It's been running, as you say, for 50 years.
mm-hmm.
Rain or shine, because it's under the BART tracks. And it is probably in a lot of ways the birthplace of most of the heroes and traditions in the West. They used to conduct province business on the sidelines. They didn't have an actual province meeting. They just had province business on the sidelines. And Bart is even so very much focused on get there, get into armor, fight. And then, as Duke Radnor calls it, go to church afterward, go to social at the bar, socialize there, fight it at practice.
Yeah. That's really, really neat. I mean, it had kind of a magic to it when I went. I wound up having to take an Uber to go to the train station, north of Milpitas, and then I drove up to, or then I did took the BART with my armor and, got underneath there, and it was like, wow, this looks like either a great place to get robbed or to have one of the best fighter practices ever.
A little of column A, a little of column B.
There you go. There was a palpable energy to it at times, depending upon who was there and what the mix was that night, how things were going, how much training was going on, how much outright fighting was happening instead of training. And as Leotulf said, the social time afterwards, we would get together, we would have immediate critiques. It was one of those deals where there was no waiting and for a phone call or whatever. You would invite whoever to come along with you, and you go sit down and you talk for another 2 hours. It was very special. I don't know if it still is, but back in the day, it was really something.
I understand that they had to change the church. That they used to go to Barclays, but now they go to a different bar.
Okay.
Barclays is closed. So,
oh wow!
And that was an Oakland Berkeley landmark.
Yeah.
So,
Circling back just a little bit, we had started talking about His Grace Duke Radnor. What can you tell us about his style? I mean, how did he hold his weapons? What did he primarily fight with? Kind of take us back and paint a picture for us, because it's one thing to be able to say, Duke Radnor won his first of 6 crowns at a certain time, but add some flavor.
Wow. So let's see, when I got to the West, so that was 1980. So I was in my mid 20s, and I believe Dan was in his early 20s, and he wasn't His Grace yet. And he fought with a bunny round, and he's 6'3", 4", faster than grease lightning. He's completely colorblind, so he sees in black and white. So any movement, I mean, it was amazing to watch him at first, because you got caught up in watching him. Mm-hmm. Because of his body movements and the things that he could do, right? It was one of those, whoa, wait a second, how do you do that? And fortunately, he did take me on as a trainee. And it was one of those things where I was also squire to Paul. I had the best of both worlds. So it was just a time where the strength and body movement and agility of Paul was enhanced even more by Radnor. And you added, the completely different shield styles, the body speed, the hand speed, the reaction timing. And all of a sudden, for somebody in my position, it was like, whoa, wait a second. This fighting thing, there is a whole lot here. But watching Radnor fight, you learned pretty quickly. If you had any fighter sense, you knew where not to stand, and you knew pretty much what not to do. Because if you watch the people in front of you, and there's 8 people that are all dying doing the same thing, then you learn very fast that don't do that. But it was about the timing and the mechanics, and it's asking him, what do you see? So where are you staring? Mm-hmm. What's going on here? There's nothing predetermined. There's a reaction, isn't there? And it could go both ways. It could be that he would start an action, but a lot of the times, and in the way I was trained, most of the time I'd let the opponent go first, right? And the old movement is opportunity, and again, then I had something to react to, or I had something I could do something to try and put an idea in their head of what I was about to do. Right. So trying to give them a perception of something. But Radnor in the early, oh my goodness. And then, watching him fight with sword and shield was one thing. Then I got to see him fight two sword.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my God. Right. Because one of Paul's predominant styles was two sword as well. And it was like watching these guys was just a gift. It's like, wow, wait, there's just too much going on here, and the way that, the sword that was blocking loaded the other weapon, right? And it could turn into a continuous flow, was really something.
That sounds great, man. I'd love to be able to find some secret video of that, or maybe, slip into that time machine and go back and check that out.
Yeah, we could contact His Grace and see if he has any, and maybe get him to post some of it to the Coach's Corner. So,
and I did misspeak. I said, I could say, he won his first of 6 crowns. He would have won his first of 8 crowns. So, but again, the pure statistics don't tell us near the story that, being able to share some firsthand eyewitness views does. So just during the 80s, there were 6 dukes made during that decade. Radnor was a new duke in the 80s. His Grace Frederick of Holland won his second during the 80s. William the Lucky became a duke during the 80s. Rolf the Relentless,
yes,
his first of 5 was in the 80s, and he became a duke that decade. A guy that I know, His Grace Stephen of Beckenham. I met Beck after he moved to the Middle Kingdom, but he won his duchy in the 80s there, and first of 3. And some guy named Jade won his duchy, I guess, in the 80s.
Yeah, on any given day, the blind pig finds the acorn. Yeah.
So, Leotulf, who would you, out of that group, is there anyone you'd like to talk about, or do you want to add someone else from the notable fighter list of the 80s?
Well, of the dukes, the two that weirdly remind me of each other are Radnor and Beck. You go out there to fight them, and you get hit, and you're like, "That was so cool! Ow!" You're trying to track what they're doing. I learned more from watching them fight other people than I ever did watching them, fighting them myself. And I learned a ton watching, especially Radnor. But Beck was also a friend, and he would usually make time for me at mission, and he had a really good way of seeing the fight, so he could go, "This is what I'm seeing. This is what you're doing."
Right.
I have had the opportunity to cross swords with everyone on this list except William the Lucky.
Okay.
And in crowns, tournaments of some sort, so not just at practice, I got to fight Radnor in a crown. That was an experience.
Fighting Radnor in a crown?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was an immediate experience.
It was in the early 2000s.
Later.
So I walked off the field, and he said, "Well, I had to leg you." Thanks. I had the joy of meeting Duke Stephen in one of his comeback tournaments after he had some heart issues. He entered a Miss Coronet, and I was his final opponent, and I could not have had more fun that day.
Right.
That was.
No, that's when I think of His Grace Stephen of Beckenham, and the first thing I think of is just how good he looks on the field.
Yes.
I mean, his kit is fantastic. He holds himself like he actually is a skilled and knowledgeable artist, you know. And then the joy of the fight really does come out from his movement and from the blows that he throws and from the defense that he takes and
Yes.
his stance. I mean, it's a beautiful fight to watch.
Yes.
I would go to Candlemasses in the mid realm, and when I wasn't fighting, I'd look for Beck just to watch, because it was like, it was the best of fighter TV. Because
Yes.
I mean, he's very, very artistically dramatic in how he stands. And then you guys made Radner sound especially scary when you said he was 6'3" and like fought like Beck or had similarities. I'm like, wow, that's a big, tall bunch of cool fighting.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was something to see back in the day. I must confess out of my heart that, I do hold Radnor and His Grace Stephen and His Grace Jade in high regard and love them all. One of them was a trainer of mine, and the other two allowed me the opportunity and the privilege to assist them in their training. And it was the amount of effort put into their training by the three of each of them, was just astounding to me how hard Radnor worked on developing skills and then enhancing them. And then, taking one thing, countering it, and then coming up with the counter to the counter, which is another thing that Paul was teaching me to do, right? It's like the similarities across great fighters somehow come out in the same sort of list, and the fact that His Grace Stephen he never locked into one style, right? He can fight boxer, he can fight a number of different styles. And so whatever the fight, wherever the fight took him, he was ready. Right now, in his training and everything, he did not have the natural abilities that Jade had, but in the years that he trained and the years that Jade trained, I mean, they are bull. I mean, I give them stuff like I just did because I know them and I love them, but you would be hard pressed to find individuals that worked harder on their training or harder on the training of others.
So speaking of training, if of the 80s, if we could say maybe Radner, maybe another one of those guys would be like the fighter of the decade in the West. Who's the trainer of the decade?
Oh, well, that was my decade. But I was training myself as well as training others. So I don't know that I can, set myself aside. So nor should I. So.
Okay, well, I mean, and I think your modesty speaks well of yourself. So let's set yourself aside. So if you're one camp and you're training yourself and you're training others, who are some of the other, sort of camps that are, working with groups of people?
Well, the Ermine, Radnor.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, Rolf and I can't remember. There was another night up in Sinagua. I know they were training a bunch of guys.
Michael Hugh?
No, the tall, slender, red-haired guy, long red hair.
Oh,
I can't remember his name.
I can't either. He hasn't been around in so long.
Right, but I know they were doing quite a bit of training up in Sinagua.
And Andrew of Riga.
Yeah, Andrew was around.
And I know he's been doing a lot of training for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. So in our previous episode, we spoke about some of the traditions that were started in the early days. Off the tops of your heads, are there any new traditions that may have started in this decade, the decade of the 80s? Whether they're official or not?
Well, there's always a chain. I have two young knights looking at me like, what's that?
Are you referring to the Gildemar chain?
Absolutely. To us that were there, it is the chain.
Uh,
Yeah.
You're
But,
preaching
yeah.
to the choir. I had the honor of being knighted with that chain also.
Yes. Well done. Well done. So did I.
All
So
right,
did
then
I.
let's break that thing out and talk about it a little bit.
Oh. Okay.
Describe it, and tell us what's going on with it, because I love these kinds of things.
It was a knight's chain.
Mhm.
And if I was, so again, I was number 3, because
Got
I
it.
believe it went from Radnor to Sir Thomas, from Sir Thomas to me, and I only had it a couple of months, and then it moved on from there. It was a knight's chain, but it was what was imbued into it and what it stood for, and the next bearer had to be chosen. And so it was one of those things that it very quickly it became I'm not even Leotulf, what would you call it? It's not a custom, it's
a talisman.
I guess that's the easiest way to put it.
I have the lineage of it from AS7 to AS50 in front of me.
Oh, okay. So
Now,
where did it actually start then?
And keep in mind, it was $2 worth of lamp chain.
Yeah, that's all it was.
It is now black. It started off gilded brass.
Yes.
And it is now black.
There it is.
Yep.
That's it.
It started with Duke William of Houghton,
There we go.
who gave it as a gift to his son Christopher, who then gave it as a gift to Radnor.
There we go.
I believe each of them was on the throne at the time.
Cool.
Earl Thomas was the first knighted with it.
Okay, there we go.
And then you.
Right.
Then my knight, Viscount Leon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then Artemis Maximus.
There we go.
And then Philip Harlech of Exeter.
Right.
And James Gale McTeer.
Yeah. So for a while we were sort of keeping it in the household.
And from here, this is where it first leaves the household. It was given to Duke Jade.
There we go.
And then it came back to Richard of Aldertree, Alfred of Carlisle.
Okay.
Richard of Greyfall. And then it goes back outside of the lineage again to Count Benjamin Nefanovich Medvednikovitev.
Okay, I'm glad you got that one.
So our producer has chimed in and says that the caption on the photo says that there's 150 reigns between all the men and women who've worn that chain.
Whoa.
That does not surprise me.
Wow. Yeah. So now the idea of that talisman carried over into being such a special item that on the 20th anniversary of Duke Radnor's knighting, a bunch of us went to the town of Battle in England, where the Battle of Hastings was fought, to celebrate that knighting. And I was allowed permission by the King of the West to carry the chain with me on my person to England so that we could present it to His Grace Radnor once again, as we did vigil in the remains of the cathedral there, the church that was there. And it was one of those things that it was such, at that point, yes, it was part talisman, but it was also, at that point, it was part custom of the house to have it. And it was, okay, here we are all again, here we are in the presence of this, right? And it affected His Grace quite a bit, so.
And remembering the stories, His Grace took a length of chain to Battle Abbey. I believe they cut it there and made knights chains for all of the knights in attendance. I had, about a week after my knighting, I had the honor of meeting Earl Thomas the Incomplete out at an event in Trimaris. And so I was wearing the chain. And so we traded chains for the day. So he could wear that chain again, and I could wear his chain from battle.
Yeah. Wow.
That's amazing. That
Yeah.
really is. I'm so glad that you guys brought that up and we were able to kind of share that with the known world, a little bit of that extremely. And this is one of those things, you know, people outside of the SCA don't understand and may never understand the cool little magical things that we've created, history that we've made that significantly impacts, you know, good people for the course of their lifetime and has the potential to go on for longer. So, you know, I am fascinated by not only these traditions, but how they, you know, how they started and how they're continued through. So thank you so much, both of you, for being able to share about that one.
Yeah, I'm glad Leotulf had the history because, yeah, there was obviously a bunch of history there I either did not know or I'd forgotten, that's for sure.
So the chain has gone from the west to the east to Ethelmark, Artemisia, Caid, Trimaris, and Lockok.
Wow.
And it may have gone, I am only up to AS 50, so it may have gotten to other places, but it has been all over the known world.
That's really something.
That's great. All right, I'm going to cue the music, the soundtrack of the 80s. Pick your Flock of Seagulls or the Smith song of your choice is going to fade out, and we're going to fade in with some Nirvana and talk about the 1990s. So just some quick statistical information. New Dukes during the 1990s: Christian de Glaive, Stefan of Bellatrix, Fabian Arnett von Schwitzigen, and then His Grace Uther won his duchy in the 90s. So that's our Dukes, and then some of the just little notable lists I put down. You know, Jade starts that new decade with the first really of 6 more wins. You know, just, I know we'll get into the Jade specifics, you know, at some point, but it's just, you know, the guy has, I think 17 total, you know.
That sounds right.
So he got his first of his 3 in the 80s. He got 6 more in the 90s, and he'd win 6 more in the aughts for a total of 17. So, you know, I think it's probably impossible to talk about the history of Western fighters and not leave a significant portion, you know, and that's just as crowns. And I really hate that we lean kind of heavily on who won, you know, how many crowns and so forth, but it's the tourney that people actually write down the information about. So it's easy for me to kind of track that. One of the reasons why it's so great to have you guys on is that you can fill in the gaps, and the gaps are huge. You know, I mean, there are people who, you know, never win a duchy who are fantastic, wonderful fighters who influence generations. So that's why you guys are here. You're to help me fill in that. I can throw out this information that, you know, Jade won so many. But let's who wants to go first? Who wants to jump in and start talking about fighters in the 90s?
Leotulf does.
Okay.
Leotulf does.
So, you know, we talk about all the Dukes. One of the men who's kind of on my notables list is Brand McClellan.
Okay.
Brand is number one, he's got one of the greatest growth arcs of anyone I've ever seen. And he's one of the most amazingly athletic people you will ever meet. He started with a glaive, and he won his coronet with a glaive. And he has finaled in crowns a number of times with that. I know a number of people think that Brand is one of those guys who's a duke who just hasn't gotten around to sitting a throne. He is definitely, he's athletic, and then he started to develop the ability to teach. As a lot of people, you know, they develop it after they become great, and then they learn to teach it. And he was one of Paul's students, and he really took to heart a lot of Paul's power generation, and then combined it with his own native athleticism. He's one of the few people who I can say 100% he can throw a jump shot and get it to work every time. You know, most people get the timing wrong. He could throw it and make it work.
Right.
I remember fighting him again in a crown, and he unloaded on me. He threw 4 shots into the same zone, and I didn't have time to move my stick. I was trying to, just didn't have time. And so, yeah, he's one of those guys that doesn't get, you know, the brand recognition, if you pardon the pun, for you know, for a duchy, because he's never won a crown, but he won a coronet as an unbelt, and just never looked back. He just continuously got better. I haven't seen him in a number of years. I know he moved over to the Battle of Nations and the live steel stuff, and I'm not sure. I haven't seen him in a couple of years.
Neat. So anyone else kind of falls in that category before we jump in on the dukes and counts of the decade?
Well, in you know, some of the other people that have never, or it took them a long time, they never achieved a duchy. For example, Ragnar Beowulf, who was a viscount in the 90s. He won crown in, I want to say 2003, but he's one of those all business fighters.
Mm-hmm.
He's having a great time, but he just doesn't make many mistakes.
Right. And he is also still training, as far as I know, as well.
He is. One of his squires was knighted at the West Kingdom's last crown.
Great. Yeah.
So maybe this is a good place to sort of jump in and tell us a little bit about how the principality and principality list kind of serve a different function than the crown list. You know, in the kingdoms, and I was originally from Meridies, and at one point Glen Aubin came up and became a principality, but the Glen Aubin always, the whole purpose of creating a principality for Glen Aubin was so that they could become a kingdom. Whereas you guys have some principalities that, you know, they're existing in perpetuity without really looking for a jump off point to grow into being a kingdom. They exist differently, you know, than the way some of these other principalities are formed, who are specifically formed just to become a kingdom.
Right. That's very true in the West.
Yeah. There's, you know, we have Owertha, of course, which their numbers tend to be pretty low.
Sure.
And so
that's
likelihood of them
Alaska
going
for those who aren't
yeah.
playing at home.
And the likelihood of them becoming a kingdom is probably not all that high. Not that they don't work and they're some of the best people in the world. It's just they don't have the numbers to meet the corporate rules. The Misks, I'm sure we have the numbers. We just don't have the interest. It's the Misks is kind of the land where time began, and being part of the West is it's a bragging point for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the joke that I've heard that is not accurate at all, but I've still heard it, is that the grant level fighting award in the West is a viscounty, and you know that's certainly probably not very funny to people who've won them, But you know, I think actually it provides a different set of goals and a different job than sitting on a throne. And I can see where, you know, it would be very attractive to make that a goal, to do both those things, to win that list and to give that job, you know, your full attention, because it's a different kind of focus than both crown list and then sitting you know, a royal seat for 4 months to 6 months, whatever.
Right. Well, the crowns in the West being, you know, the fact that we had 3 of them a year, you know, it was one of those things that there were a lot of times that you would get asked as a Knight of the West, why do you guys do 3 crowns? Well, because that's the way it's always been. It seems to work well. And, you know, it's one of those things that does, quote unquote, distinguish the West, right? The coronets, 2 a year. It was interesting. The coronets served quite a purpose, especially for our unbelted population that was coming along, because it's like, well, you know, I don't know about crown, but I think I'll go to coronet. Well, okay, well, let's go to coronet then. You know, whichever one you want to do, let's do both. You know, that would be great. Let's do both. Whichever, you know, so as a trainer, you know, having that opportunity for them to, well, you know, I really only want to try coronet. I really don't want to enter crown yet. Okay, that's great. But let's go to coronet. Let's see how it works out for you.
One of the things
really good.
Yeah. One of the things that a principality reign does is it gives you an opportunity to learn the responsibilities of being a royal, but always have a place to pass the buck up.
Sure.
Right.
You know, so you've got a safety net. I reigned as an unbelt. I believe, Sagan, you did too.
No, I was knighted.
Oh, okay. But you know, I know a number of unbelts who were gemstones that hadn't been polished, and that time on the throne of the mist really gave them the polish that they needed to then push into the knighthood and other roles.
Yeah, the mist or Sonagua, either one.
Yeah.
The idea that Sacramento was only 90 miles away from San Francisco, right? I mean, we were both principalities and the kingdom. I mean, you're in an hour and a half of one another, really, of Kingdom Central. So if there was something that needed to be discussed, if you needed help with something, you know, whatever it was, there was always help available, right? And so if a question came up about law or a question came up about something financial, you could literally just go talk to the person in most cases, you know. In the worst case, back then you had to pick up and dial a phone. I mean, oh my God, who'd have thought, you know? And if you weren't at home, you couldn't call them. Oh no. So, but yeah, the principalities, you know, to me, it was like, wow, because I came from the East, like I said, and I was in Atlantia. So, but it was a principality of Atlantia. They hadn't become a kingdom yet. And the Kingdom Central for them was way up in New York.
Sure.
Right? So for me, it was like, well, what happens in Kingdom? Because I got told, well, you know, we're you know, this is a different part of the kingdom. So yeah. But yeah, it's such a good deal all the way around for everybody involved to have that opportunity to fight in both, to serve in both. So
it sounds great. I mean, it really does. From an outsider looking in kind of a thing, it's sort of like, I don't understand that. And it's like, well, if you look at it and think about it, it makes great sense. I mean, it as a fighter, it's so nice to be able to have goals and to be able to test yourself, you know,
Right.
and to see where you are. And, you know, if the test is only crown, you know, well then, you know, that's only a few tests a year. Whereas if you can add your coronet list, then you're having additional tests, and that, you know, and any student, as anything knows, you know, the more you test yourself, you show where you're, you know, you have growth potential. So, you know, that just allows the training to work that much better if you're able to, you know, go through and test yourself. But having that a rich tradition of a principality, you get to go through and do those things and still be part of the kingdom family and have that support from kingdom there.
Yes.
Sounds very encouraging, and it sounds like a great way for couples and people within the SCA to have to learn aspects of SCA royalty without having as Leotulf says, all the weight and responsibility of the kingdom.
Right. The other thing that it provided too is it provided opportunities to the populace for those who were interested in serving as officers or who were interested in serving on a court, but they didn't want to go all the way to the kingdom level, right? But they were interested in becoming involved. So there were those two outlets for that as well, and they were well served by our volunteers.
So our producer tells us that Duke Ron says he was the first unbelted Prince of the Mist.
I would agree. Yes.
I wasn't sure if he was where he fell in your career timeline.
Oh, in mine?
Yeah.
Oh, I worked with him quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was another one that did me the honor and the privilege of allowing me to assist him, and a very avid student. Yes. Very young, right? But yes.
All right. So let's dive into, with the time that we have left for the 90s, to talk a little bit about some of these other guys. So, Jade, we say has won a number of crowns, starting in the decade before, but definitely through the 90s. What's his, I hear that he's athletic. What's his principal style? How's he hold himself? Is he a range fighter, or is he a game fighter? Something in between. Kind of paint a picture for us, and
Wow.
let's let imagination see what you guys have seen.
Trying to pin him down is that that's really something. He's got you. I mean, his training and his continued training was to a point where whatever happened. Didn't matter. Right? His skill set was continually polished. Things were added, things were enhanced, things were dropped. Right? And he was another one of those fighters, somewhat like Uther. When you step on the field, the switch goes on. There's no volume control or anything like that. The switch is on. Right? And there was speed, there was power, there was body movement. There was some deception, but most of it was indeed straight up. But you didn't dare make a mistake, right? Because he was ever ready for the other guy to make a mistake at whatever range.
The one word that I always think of when I think of Jade is explosive movement and explosive power.
Yes.
Okay.
Could be. Yes.
He would go from a foot out of your range to inside your armor with you in a heartbeat.
Right.
And
then suddenly be on your left-hand side where he wasn't before. It's like, what's he doing over there? So.
And he would come at you. Like many fighters, he's got a couple of signature shots. He's got an offside body.
Yep.
Okay.
That is terrifying.
Yep. Especially if you're on your knees.
But he's always, his presence is huge. You step out on the field and he's got the shield, and he's going, this chunk of dirt is mine.
Yep.
You can try and take it. Yep. And he's the complete package when it comes to the fighting knight or fighting duke.
Right.
Sure.
He was one of those people that won countless fights at the moment the fight was announced.
Yep.
Because it got inside his opponent's head almost immediately. So Radnor had the same thing happen. So it's like, oh geez. Yep, here we go.
So with his grace, Jade, is his sword on his shoulder, or is it up in that kind of high up with the shield. Is it a big shield? Is it a small shield?
It's a small half rounder, medium-sized half rounder square.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of times he presents very forward with his shield hand held low.
Mhm.
Sword is either up high or down just behind his head. Rarely is it down his back, for example, in the old
Right.
high tower.
Right.
Sure.
It is ready because just in case you do something squirrely, he's going to be able to put that sword in the way.
Right.
But he is inviting you to do something stupid.
Okay.
In general, he's inviting you to just do anything you want.
Yep.
Whatever you think, you go first. And it was very, it was very disconcerting, watching him at first, when he was training. It was just like when it all started to coalesce and he continued on, it was like, oh boy, it's like, come here, said the spider to the fly. It's just, he's so ready, right?
Yeah.
And it was disconcerting, right? He's just standing there. But in his presence of just standing there, most fighters were just like, whoa, wait, I don't know what to do to this, right? And inevitably, a lot of them, that's what they died to. They, would do something, or worse yet, do nothing.
Well, I hate to do it because I feel like we're leaving people behind that we should talk about, but we are not going to get done if I don't force us to move into another decade.
Keep moving forward.
But you know what? I'm going to go back anyway.
Really quick, one thing,
please.
One of the things that we're talking about people who've made a mark on fighting in the West, and one of those is Uther, because a lot of people took training very seriously. Uther is one of the first that I'm aware of who made it like training for any other sport.
Mm-hmm.
His squires, his trainees were given calisthenics and strengthening exercises, cardio exercises. He was building athletes that fought with swords, as opposed to some of the others who were building swordsmen who might or might not be athletic.
Sure. I think that's a great transition to help us here too, because, whereas we know that Uther won his first couple of crowns in the 90s, it really looks like his decade was the aughts, that first 10 years of this new century. I mean, not that he's not been anything but ever present ever since, but I mean, he looks like he really owned the aughts and really put his stamp there. So I think that's a great way for us to transcend into that next decade. So we've got His Grace Uther, and again, he's won his first two of 12 crowns in the 90s, and then he's going to jump back in and get quite a few more during this next decade. And you're now bringing up the point that he also really approached the training like it was a sport, which to me is endlessly fascinating, because I think that's where we are now, and it's where a lot of us are trying to help people get to. That quick interruption, but let you get right back in it. So we're in the aughts, man.
Sagan, what are your thoughts?
Well, by then I had already moved. I've been in Artemisia since the mid-90s. Uther, however, I have history with, as I have history with Fabian. But you cannot find a more, if there was ever an individual who to me personified the absolute competitor, it would be Uther, and I say that with all respect. And having known Uther from his beginnings and to who he is now, because he lives approximately 25 miles from me now, if that. Again, as Leotulf brought up about the training, he is just something to watch. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, some of the same things that were said about Jade's, you know, the way Jade could compete and the way Uther competes and all this. And it's like, yeah, there are similarities. Well, there should be, right? But the deal is, you will not find a more quote unquote involved individual as far as a fighter and a trainer than Uther. And I am absolutely appreciative of his abilities and the fact that he will continue to train here.
Yeah, you guys are going to have a quite the little training hotbed with you know, His Majesty there already, known for his training worldwide, and now also you know, His Grace Uther moving in.
Yes, indeed.
I remember that guy.
Has a lot more hair than the last time I met him.
That's not a hair
You know,
joke, is it?
aren't we all in that situation? So the 2000s have started here. You know, dukes made in that decade in the West are Havek of House Bender, Connor Weishaupt, Alden of Wolverton, His Grace
Yes.
Thorfin the Cruel,
Yes.
and Titus Scipio Germanicus. So understanding that, you know, Uther is stomping around and both helping with the, you know, raising the overall prowess as well as putting his mark on the tournaments, we've got a bunch of other really super hot sticks this decade.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Again, I was not around in the aughts. However, I was around in the beginning when Havek was coming up.
Mhm.
You couldn't find a nicer guy if you tried. And such a fighter. I mean, he became such a fighter. And then Alden, yes, I know him well. He and Ragnar were a couple of, again, the individuals who did me the honor and the privilege of allowing me to train with them, to help with them train. So did Thorfin.
Nice.
And you guys know Thorfin. I mean, Thorfin, Ragnar, and Alden, wow. I mean, just such stellar individuals. I'm gushing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's good. Hey, Leotulf, question. Which came first, Havek's prowess or Havek's leather pants?
I
Ooh.
From the time I first met him, both of them existed.
Okay.
He I think always went the way of the German clothing, the German stylings.
Yeah.
So I think he came into the SCA with those.
Yeah.
But
Now I can't remember. Leotulf, do you remember when did he hook up with Mari? Because I know that had a big deal to do with how he dressed.
that would have been, I think in the aughts, maybe as early as, so he won his first crown in '98,
Okay.
and it may have been right around then. So
Yeah, and at 6'7", a guy walking around in Germans is just something to see. So,
and he has probably been the most formative influence on my fighting.
Okay.
cool.
I use a very similar shield to the one that he used when he first came up.
Huh?
An interesting side note about Havek, his goal is to challenge himself.
Yes.
So when he won 2 reigns with the larger kite shield like mine, put it away and picked up what we call the tortilla chip, which was
The postage stamp. Yeah.
a triangle, a foot on a side.
Yeah.
And then he went from there. He won 2 crowns with that, put that away and picked up 2 swords. He won 2 crowns with 2 swords. He's put that down, and now he's working on small shield left-handed.
Just amazing.
And I have had the absolute honor of getting to work with him a little bit, helping him find his feet with that left-handed. My ribs aren't thrilled about it, but the rest of me is. And he's the consummate analyst. He works backward when he's looking at throwing a particular shot. He's trying to figure out, okay, it's going to land here, so my feet need to be here, and then he works back to the starting position. And he is one of those people who really works on what's next. How do you get from here to here? And because he works from a very defensive mindset, where is he going to go? He's thrown this. Where is he going to go? What are his next options to throw at me?
Mm-hmm.
I can't say enough about his ability to train and his ability to analyze. No one out there has ever broken down my fight the way he does.
Mhm.
And he can make a 4-degree change in my foot position, and then he uses the right words to make that stick.
There you go.
Right.
There you go.
Um,
There you go.
yeah. One of the others is that's similarly defensive minded, but has an entirely different style is Connor Vsct.
Okay.
Connor is a hugely strong man.
Oh, boy.
I once watched him pick up the tongue of a full trailer to get it seated on the ball. Just incredibly strong and knows how to use that power. He's another one that it's explosive. He will block everything that you throw. Then all of a sudden he's standing next to you on the right side, trying to push your ribs over to the left side. It's absolutely a joy to fight, a joy to watch fighting. He's incredibly stable. If that, for a fighter, that's huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't be able to knock him over with a hammer.
Right, right. And he is just hearkening back to one of the Dukes we talked of back in the 80s and 90s, Radnor. They are both lithe and agile, and it's such a pleasure to watch them fight. It's just like, wow, this is just really something to see. So, because it is that uncommon. And for Vsct at 6'7", it's just like, wow, this is just, so to those who are going to make the argument, that there's a perfect height for a fighter and they won't be able to do certain things depending upon how short or how tall they are. No, not at all. Not even close.
One of the things that is remarkable in its way about the Vsct and the Uthers as trainers is there are a lot of things that they do because they're really tall, but
right.
everything that they do can be taught to somebody because they're all mental things, and the things that they do can be taught to someone. I'm 5'10", 5'11", and I do those same reaches. Yep, that's Connor and Fabian, who was his knight.
Yep, there we go.
Vsct and Uther are not teaching tall fighters; they're teaching fighters.
Right.
I have watched Vsct work with a young lady who's 5'2" and 100 pounds soaking wet in her armor, and be able to give her the same tools that he uses, and then be able to help her find ways to make them work from a 5'2" perspective instead of a 6'6", 6'7" perspective.
Well, that's a hard thing to do. I know I'm not a 6'7" fighter / trainer, I'm a 6'5" fighter trainer, and it's still, there's a lot of things about being tall that don't translate, but there's a lot of fundamentals about fighting that are universal. And I became a significantly better fighter when I added more fundamentals to my actual fighting And then I was able to translate that into the teaching, as opposed to telling people, well, you ought to just be tall and bend. That's not particularly helpful. So,
Right. Right.
so it's great that they both have, been able to work so well at doing the translation between just being tall and actually being good.
The last thing you want to hear from somebody, how do you throw that shot? Well, start by being able to bench press 330 pounds.
Yeah.
That's not helpful.
Right.
And
Right. Well, and then either, we've heard these horror stories where, well, can you explain that shot to me? Well, no, I can't, because, I'm 6'7". I have a 2.5-foot arm and I stick a 3-foot sword on the end of it. You're only 5'6". It's like, now, wait a minute. I didn't ask you about the advantages of you versus me doing it. What I wanted was to be trained and have an explanation of how the blow functioned and the targets that it could function against. But
the
it's one of
mechanics
those
of
things.
it.
Yeah, it's just, it is for some of the trainees, it's the luck of the draw of who they ask. So
That one of the things I liked about learning from Beck when he was living out here was his ability to break down a shot into its components and then tell you how. So I throw it this way, you're going to have to replace this connective tissue with your own connective tissue to get it to here, and then your own connective tissue to get it to here.
right.
And he was very good at explaining that.
Yes. Yeah.
As I look at your list, though, there's one of the things that we kind of forget about is those guys who made their first mark in the aughts. Guys who won their first crown or their first coronet in that early part of the century. Hans von Wolfholz. Here's a real throwback, Parlin McGillivray, who won in like 2001 as a Prince of the Mists. He now lives in the Outlands, but he's another tall, strong guy who made a mark in how he threw things and the grace and the graceful power that he put together. Titus, who was able to take different people and help them to improve their mechanics, starting from the inside and working out. It doesn't matter how you throw the shot if you can't make your body do the things that it has to do. And he was excellent at that.
Is that the same Titus that moved to Ethelmark?
Yes. And I believe he won twice in Ethelmark. But he was an exceptional trainer in the mechanical area.
So let's see if we can make Thorfin's ears burn a little bit. What's it like fighting Thorfin back in the 2000s?
Well, I have to admit, once again, my history with Thorfin was prior to that. But yeah, Leotulf, I'm gonna have to rely on you, buddy, because what a fighter, what a man, what a friend. I mean, once again, wow.
Thorfin is one of my heroes. He is actually the king who offered me knighthood in his second reign. And we became friends back, in the mid 90s, I think is when we first met. And in the latter part of the 90s, when I was starting to come up, I met him in every major list for 3 years in either the third or fifth round. Needless to say, the overwhelming majority of those went to him, but he was and is, he has evolved his style a lot He is a
Indeed.
control fighter,
Yep.
control of range. If you want to fight close, he's going to fight away. If you want to fight away, he's going to stand on your toes. He's going to pick his real estate, and he's going to control what you can do in the fight. It's really amazing to watch. It's a little less fun when you're in the fight, but it's a lot of there's a lot of joy in fighting Thorfin, and he's just for a guy who's 5'7", 5'8", he's larger than life in almost every way. Listening to him tell stories, there's a descriptive noun for him, Thorfin vision, which is how he tells stories. And he's, his fight is again one of control and all business. He steps on the field, you're not his friend anymore, you're a target.
Right.
And as soon as somebody falls over, you're buddies again.
Absolutely.
Well, that's good. So real briefly, before we leave the aughts and get into the tens, who's our trainers that are really standing out this decade? Obviously, Uther is, I'm sure if he was started training and teaching it as well in the 90s, then he's very much doing the same thing. We know that Havek is also training and doing a really good job of that and making his mark in that regard. Who else is sort of standing out as trainers during the aughts?
So across like the last 4 decades or 3 decades, Robert of Woodsend.
Okay.
In the aughts, we're looking at Mark Darendell. He came back into the SA about 2006, maybe.
Okay.
And was training and working through things. Hans von Wolfholtz.
Was Ragnar still training then in Alden up in Sinagua?
Yeah, Ragnar. Alden, I think, was getting ready to start his break.
Okay.
He had some injuries that he has been working to recover from. Fabian, of course, was also training a lot.
There you go.
Connor.
Okay.
All of the Dukes were doing their job as trainers, but some of the guys who are not on that list that stand out, Mark, Hans, Robert, who Hans and Mark come into their duchies in the next decade.
Right. Well, you're doing a good job of helping us segue from one decade to the next, because those guys are all part of our next conversation, I'm pretty sure. So we are going to move from the aughts to the 2010s. So we're getting close to the current era, but we're not quite there yet. So Dukes made this decade are Obadiah, Mark de Arundel, Miles Fitzrolf, Hans von Wolfsholtz, Alfar Utherson, and Roger Stockton. And I've been lucky enough to fight, I think, every one of those guys but Alfar and Mark. And I know I look forward to hoping to fight Mark one day. I fight him vicariously on video every time I see him. I'm like, man, that guy looks fun.
Yeah.
He is a lot of fun. We've been friends for quite a while. He actually succeeded me in my second reign in the Mists, so we got to be friends then. There's no way to say too much about Mark and his ability to fight and his ability to understand the fight. This is a guy who won his first 2 crowns with a bastard sword and his third one with a buckler.
Right.
And he won them based on his ability to keep the fight where he wanted it. I've watched him win fights with just that on his left hand. He has, people talk about, the mutant powers of various people. Well, if Mark has a mutant power, it's his dedication and his work ethic.
Sure.
He is over. I got to admit, I've watched some of his videos and whatnot. This guy is over the top. I have not witnessed this much desire, drive, determination to get it, dedication and devotion in a fighter and a Duke. It's just, to me, wow, he is really, really out there in what he does for our sport.
He is, and he was recently at the West Kingdom's Last Crown. He was elevated to the Order of the Laurel for the research and training that he's done on period fighting forms.
Oh, outstanding.
And on top of that, he's got a bit of a brusque exterior, but he's a genuinely nice, good person. He is one of the best men I know. But as far as his fighting goes, he has a complete control of the fight. Almost anyone I ever see him fight. I had the great pleasure of training with him for probably 5 or 6 years. We just went to the same practice, and
yeah,
the number of times, like your Grace, I tend to have fairly long arms, and the number of times I just whiff. His control of real estate is epic.
What it really looks like when I watch him fight is just such a keen understanding of range. Not just the range he is between his opponent, but that his opponent and his opponent's weapons are from him.
Right.
And how to manipulate all of those things into his favor, and then having the cardio and mental discipline to force the fight to stay exactly in those areas. And if you're fighting with a buckler, and you're fighting primarily with a bastard sword, and you're trying to go through person after person after person, the mental just sheer willpower associated with making sure that you are always fighting your fight, and that they're not getting into the things that would be their sweet spots. That's really hard to do. And I mean, I think of when you're like analyzing, athletes in other sports, one of the things that you can talk about is someone's motor. And his motor, both the one between his ears and the one in his legs, is always working. It looks like always in perfect sync and true to the thing that he's trying to do. And he's not taken by surprise hardly ever.
There's almost no point in all of that movement that he does that he cannot throw 2 or 3 killing blows in succession from wherever he is.
Yeah.
So there's no seam to work into. It really is a pleasure to watch.
Well, knock on wood, I'll get a chance to fight him sometime.
Now,
before
did I understand that you're out in the West now, or have you not gotten here yet?
No, that was the plan. So my wife was hired by a company in the Bay, and this was pre-pandemic. And so we absolutely planned on getting the kids through school and then moving out. But then the pandemic hit. So we did not move. We're still in Arizona. And, we're here for at least for the duration because, in that time, my wife proved that she was an outstanding work from home person. And they were like, well, you can live wherever you want. And as much as we wanted to go and be a part of that community and to fight those people, we like not paying Bay Area real estate prices.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
the reason I ask is Mark is a regular at the practices here in the South Bay.
Yeah, I will find a way to get up there anyway, just so that I can, visit with everyone and to fight. But for as long as we can, somehow finagle to live in a decent sized house in the suburbs of Phoenix versus a tiny little place anywhere in the Bay, we're going to do that.
There you go. Indeed.
I don't know how you guys can do it.
as we go back and look at the list, we're looking at Miles and Alfar, who you almost can't mention one without the other. They've been friends and brothers since they were in like high school, and they came up together. They started going to practice together. Miles's father was one of the early influencers of Western fighting. At that time, he was John the Lean.
I'll be darned.
And they came out
Did he
of
change his name eventually to be a Fitzrolf?
Yes.
Because I used to see his name all the time in various, in Merides, it was our Kingdom newsletter was Popular Chivalry, but in the back it always had IKAC champions, and he was always there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But you're right; they do need to be mentioned in many ways in the same. And not that they're identical fighters, but they're of a generation. They have that shared familial, sort of background. But I was kind of thinking about it. It's like, I think, if I had to have someone represent me on the field as a champion for just one fight, I might go with Miles. But if I was being jumped in a back alley somewhere, I think I would want Alfar with me.
That's probably a reasonable assessment. I have had the honor of fighting both of them at various times. And Miles is, again, that explosive power and speed. Alfar is a more measured fight.
Mm-hmm.
Not that he's lacking in power and speed, but he's definitely a more measured. I'm going to let you step into my killing zone and destroy you once you get there. Where Miles is a little more, I'm going to jump into the position where you're in my killing zone, and
Leon, spin shot.
Yeah. So they started more or less together, and they've taken very similar parallel paths.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both a lot of fun to fight, a lot of fun to work with. I've had to, particularly with Miles, I've been able to spend some time training with him and seeing how he does things, and showing him a little how I do things. And I think we're both better for it. See, who else do we have on our list here? Oh, Hans.
Probably the guy I fought the most out of this group.
Yep. Hans is another one. Studies in elegance. He wants an elegant, solid fight. It's never a slugfest. It's he wants the fight to look pretty.
Yeah.
And he can get in and get ugly with the best of them, but he's very good at keeping that flow and elegance into the fight. He's one of those guys, another one who you walk out there and you go, I'm going to have to take this from him if I want it. Whatever he picks up, he's got a handle on. He loves fighting sword and dagger because it's just a lot of fun for him.
Sure. I think it's also worth pointing out that, a lot of these guys that we've talked about have been, practically giants physically in their stature. And, Hans is on the other spectrum. I mean, we won't say he's vertically challenged, but, in relationship to Uther or Havek or Miles,
Right.
I mean, he's not a big guy. But
Hans and I are about the same height.
One of the most, I think, neat things about SCA combat, and is that your heart and your prowess have a heck of a lot more to do than your physical stature. And
Indeed.
I won't lie, being tall is a benefit, but if you don't work at it and you don't figure out how to work with what you've got, then it's just, there's a lot of guys out there that are tall that you can still quite easily stomp and push around. But those guys like, Hans, who has, excelled and really pushed his prowess, is having to fight through some of the challenges of not being, a fairly big person. So I think he's done a great job there. And so yourself, Leotulf. I mean, again, it's really neat that the SCA allows for lots of different body types to excel.
True, absolutely. So the one Duke we have not talked about is Obadiah. I remember him well. My memories go back quite a ways, and Ob was Ob. Ob was a presence. Ob was a friend. Ob was a guy he was Ob.
He was unapologetically
Leotulf, what are your memories?
It's just probably one of my biggest memories, and I knew Ob mostly after he was knighted, after his first reign. But we were at some party in the West Kingdom.
There he is.
And we were at Estrella, and it was pouring out, and they were having a big party in the West Kingdom Pavilion, and he said something, and some of the people looked at him, and he said, "What? You know, I was Ob when I walked in here."
That's right.
He was
absolutely.
When he stepped down after his second reign, dressed literally as Father Christmas. The big white bushy beard. He was just a presence, as Sagan said. He's always a little larger than life.
I want to make sure that we memorialize some of these people correctly. So his grace passed. What was it? 3 years ago? Can you guys make sure I'm right on the
October 2017?
Okay, so that's been a little longer than that. Then and earlier we spoke about His Grace Titus Scipio Germanicus, and I want to make sure that we memorialize him correctly too. He passed away in 2018.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah, I've never heard anything but an extraordinarily either heartwarming or hilarious story about His Grace Obadiah.
Yes, as Her Royal Highness just brought up, you can thank Ob for Crapode. So, wow.
And we mentioned Crapode just briefly the last episode, but let's make sure for those who may not be exactly aware of it, again, why don't you guys give a quick couple sentence summary of what Crapode is?
Go ahead, Leotulf.
Crapode is a practice tournament to give people the opportunity to get past
the jitters,
the mental game of entering a tournament.
Yep.
And Ob started it for his squires, and now it's running. It has run in unbroken months for over 300.
Yes, it has been going on that long.
I think they're on 305.
If you want to talk about a custom or a tradition, there's one.
Yep.
I think we touched on it the last episode, but we've got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to shout out to anyone, that not of that decade, and now, the current, and I know that the pandemic has really put a hurt on everyone getting out and a chance to fight, but we are getting, I think, as an SCA, a little bit more opportunity to do so, and a little bit more events, even if we're having to do them, more, cautiously. But and this will probably be more of a Leotulf question, but who's really standing out right now that's not been a part of our previous discussion, but you would think as a someone that if we were having this talk in 10 years, that would be a part of, this next decade?
The fighters of this generation, we're talking about Rorik Darkinson.
Okay.
New Made Knight of the West. We're talking about Seth McAlpin, another new Knight of the West. They are going to put their stamp on this kingdom. Another fighter who is currently, he's sort of one of the successors to like a Sagan as far as having incorporated Paul's fighting training.
Mm-hmm.
And the more recent ideas that Paul has been teaching, and that's Brian of Glastonbury. And of course, some of these guys that are not going to go away. God willing, I'm going to get to continue doing this.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
But we've got fighters up in Sinagua who are, the current Prince of Sinagua is somebody that I think everybody's going to want to watch. His name is Cormac.
Okay.
Another Cormac. All right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they're all across, and one of the things that we have not really talked about, and that's we haven't touched on those fighters from Awertha. And unfortunately, there's Cyrus is up there. Cyrus is another one of those dukes who just lives too far away to be able to come down and do it.
Indeed.
Soren,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Kielsen, when he was alive, was
Yes.
he was another one who was a presence, who then was able to come down and make a mark. He was, in a lot of people's minds, he was Awertha when you thought about Awerthan fighting.
Yes, indeed.
And
Yes.
Georg. So those fighters from Awertha definitely deserve that shout out, because these are guys who the next practice over might be 100 miles or might be snowed in or covered with moose.
You never know.
And they're still, they get to every practice they can. They go out there, they practice at 20 degrees. They practice below zero. I was up there for a coronet, and in order to set up a list field, they went out and they stomped it down because there were about 2.5 feet of snow, and they stomped it down so that we had a list field to fight in.
That's some dedication for you.
It
It
is.
is.
And those guys are the picture of dedication. They come down to crowns in the main kingdom, and they are forces to reckon with, every last one of them.
Well, thanks for giving Awertha a shout out there.
Yeah.
So that really concludes our sort of our trip through the decades between the last episode and this episode. So I want to thank my guests for joining us, and any parting shots there.
Yes.
Viscount Sagan?
I would, please. From my trainers, who I learned quite a bit, and from all those who allowed me to train with them and train them, and all that they taught me, helped me develop my own style of training. And it was an invaluable lesson from all of them. I mean that entirely. From His Grace, Frederick of Holland, who I met in 1977 back east, and then joined in the West in 1980, all the way, to Mark, all these newer fighters. I thank you. I really do. We've talked about those of excellence, and we've talked about those of excellence who have continued on and to have provided training wherever and whenever it was needed. And I really have to give you my heartfelt thanks for passing it on and for being there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You've been an outstanding guest, and I look forward to other episodes in the future that we get a chance to talk about things. Sir Leotulf, Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us for these past 2 episodes. Do you have any shots you'd like to hit us with?
Well, Your Grace, first off, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and I learned a great deal, especially last episode, about the early days. I didn't come into the SCA really until the late 80s. So, but as Sagan said, to all of those fighters who are out there who have literally kept hope alive over the last 2 years, when the people who were setting up practices, the people who were practicing against their housemates just so that they could stay in it, the people who were going out and doing pell work every day, those are the people who have kept the SCA and kept the fighting community together. And it's been really tough. And also, Her Royal Highness, thank you for putting this together and running it behind the scenes for us.
Indeed.
Yes, Her Highness Antir, Princess Rifkin, has done a fantastic job producing us this episode. So that's outstanding, guys. That's a wrap. Couple quick programming notes. Next Friday, the SCA Coaches Corner is going to have an episode where we talk about using your training from other sports within SCA combat. And then on the Friday the 26th, towards the end of the month, we're going to have our discussion on knighthood part 2. This one's going to be some of the specifics about how things are done in individual kingdoms. So we look forward to everyone joining us and asking your questions and being a part of our coaching and training and learning community. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Your Grace. Thank you, Your Excellency, and Your Highness.